Well, Shin Megami Tensei is one of my favorite video game franchises, and I love it. And if a new game comes out, I generally buy it. I have to say, in a lot of ways, it's very frustrating as a franchise, and my feelings towards it are very mixed. A long time ago, when video games were just starting to be like analyzed as if not art, but like as a storytelling medium, I remember reading an article, or maybe it was watching a YouTube video, about the issue with the segregation between story and gameplay. That is, that this is one of the big problems a lot of games have. Because in some cases, you'll have, if there's too much story, then you'll find yourself just clicking through menus like, get me to some action, get me to something happening. And if there's too much gameplay, you'll be playing through the level, often kind of rushing through just because you want more of a story. You want to get to some dialogue, you want to get to that kind of thing. And as a franchise as a whole, Shin Megami Tensei does a pretty poor job of doing this. At least in the main series games that I've played. And this is something that's always frustrated me, and this is a complaint I've had with a lot of games, be it Mass Effect or Dragon Age Origin, etc. Really, the only one I can think of that got it right was like Bioshock. Is I hate playing a game and then you like, oh, you found this document or you found this thing. You just stop playing the game and read it. And like maybe I would want to read that like if I'm sitting at my computer or something and I'm researching lore. But if I'm in the middle of a level and like I'm going balls to the wall, I don't want to like stop for 5 minutes to read some random book. And the thing that was really nice about BioShock was most of the game's dialogue didn't happen in cutscenes. Most of it happened when you picked up journals, and the journals would play as you're playing the game. And that was genius, and I wish more games did that. So there wasn't this like complete segregation between the two of them, and you weren't rushing through the game. You could take your time because the story and gameplay were well integrated. Strange Journey is not like this. Strange Journey is probably the most egregious case of story and gameplay segregation I've ever seen in my life. I can't think of another game that has more grinding, more monotony, and more just like it's the biggest where the fuck do I go game I've ever played. So, before we get into SMT, let's just talk a bit more about how the franchise has handled it. Because SMT games always have a lot of grinding. They're generally brutally difficult. And before they started mercifully including an easy option, whereas the easy option is like normal on any other franchise, so you still probably have to grind on easy. There's an inordinate amount of grinding to get through the games. There's also a tendency to have super long, boring dungeons that are among like the longest and most monotonous of any RPG series that I can think of. And this is combined with consistently like some of the best writing, best characters, best themes, kind of most profound statements on of philosophy that any game series has. And there's often this like kind of jarring disconnect between the two. And it's something they seem to have a lot of trouble resolving. So you have cases like this, and I'd say Soul Hackers was also like this. Shin Megami Tensei 4 was like this. Strange Journeys like this, where they decided to go for really, really gameplay focused. So like 90% of the game is just grinding, running down hallways, not sure where the hell you're supposed to go, trying to level up, trying to like find some secret like item that prevents you from being instantly killed, like just stuff like that. And then once you've gotten through like a 7-hour level, you're treated to like 10 minutes of dialogue, and then you have to go do another 7-hour level. And that's kind of what Strange Journey was like. And I think it's kind of a total failure from that perspective. And I mean, there's different ways they've tried to deal with it. In the case of Persona, what I feel they did was they just made the story parts a lot longer. So the dungeons are like long, rambling, and grindy, but they're not as bad because they're broken up with story. So like the dungeons are just not as long. You're not supposed to complete them all in one sitting in the case of like Persona 3 and 4. And anytime you want, you can just say, okay, I'm going to do like some time in the dungeon. Okay, I leveled, I got to a new floor. I'm going to leave the dungeon. I'm going to go do some story content. They at least put a lot of story content in. Well, it's not really integrated particularly well. They at least gave a lot of variety, and they didn't mandate nearly as much, just kind of that sort of thing. So, I mean, the Persona games are really good. I don't think they're very well integrated story and gameplay wise, but at least they have a decent balance of the two. And, like, playing through dungeons didn't feel like sheer monotony. Oh, well, I'm on the topic. Okay, another one in the category of too much just gameplay is Persona Q The Labyrinth, where there's only like 5 levels in the game. They're all extremely long. They just have really unintuitive puzzles. It's just grinding. The whole game is just like constant grinding. The games I think in the series that actually did the integration of the two properly was probably the Devil Survivor games, which are two of my favorite games ever made. But probably the thing about them that makes them so good is the levels are short. Like the levels last an hour at absolute maximum because it's a strategic turn-based RPG. So because of that, pretty much everything that happens in the battle is directly related to the story or the setting or the themes or something like that. It's you're fighting to like try and save the city, and even the grinding levels are you fighting off demons to try and save kind of the normal people. So that's nice. Plus the grinding is not quite as necessary, I find, it, or as in some of the other games, and it's a bit more interesting just because of the way it's set up with the party system, with how the demon auction works. It just doesn't feel as long or as annoying. Plus, there's a lot of stuff that splits it up. Like there's a lot of like story clips. Even within the battles, there's often a fair amount of character interaction. It's just very well integrated with each other. At no point when I was playing either Devil Survivor did I find myself rushing through a battle because I was bored and I wanted to get back to the actual story. So that's kind of my thoughts on the franchise as a whole. And it's something that really frustrates me, and I feel very few games do this well or make any attempt to do this properly. If there's one thing I could kind of complain about with the Zelda games, that was an issue I often had, was there wasn't enough story in them. There was too much dungeon crawling. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the dungeons, but I remember when I was playing Ocarina of Time, part of it was me, like, I just really wanted to get to the end of the level to see more Sheik, to kind of find out more about, like, the background and the story. And I just felt it kind of let me down, if I have one complaint in that, was there always... just, I felt there could have been a bit more of a balance. And I guess that's weird considering that Twilight Princess is my favorite game, and it was, like, the most dungeon focused of them all. But I digress. Just another one before we get into it. This was also kind of an issue I had with some of the Command and Conquer games, where I wanted to get to the story, I wanted to get to the cutscenes, but once again, the levels in Command and Conquer aren't that long. They're like 20 minutes to maybe an hour and a half for an extremely long mission that you're doing very methodically. It's not a very time-consuming wait, so you don't really feel the need to rush. Whereas in Strange Journey, if you're doing like a 10-hour long fucking puzzle dungeon, you just start to want to rush, but you can't. So SMT Strange Journey. This game really frustrated me. I initially had it for DS when it just came out for normal DS. I thought it was halfway through, but I guess it was maybe only a fifth through because this game is so fucking long. It's way too long, and that's, I don't know. I don't complain that often about, well, I guess I do complain about things being too long. But this is one of, if not the longest game I've ever played. Just to get through it. Like, I'm not talking about like Three Houses or Fates where you're doing like a playthrough and you're trying to get all the different stories. So it's kind of like 3 or 4 games in one. So it kind of makes sense for it to be as long as it is, because in the case of Fates, you paid for 3 games separately, and in the case of Three Houses, they're 3 completely separate campaigns. They're not alternate. I guess it is to a certain extent alternate ending, but it's not quite the same thing. This game is so long, I couldn't even believe it. When they say 44 hours there, that's a lie. That is a complete work of fiction. That is if you're using a guide and you have the DLC that lets you like level to level infinity in like the first area of the game. That's not accurate. So, like, SMT Strange Journey has a lot of things going for it. The backstory that there's I have no idea how you pronounce it. I'll just call it the Zone. The Zone is like this big dimensional pocket that's appeared over Antarctica, and it's gradually growing, and it's going to consume the entirety of the world. And you go there as part of a multinational task force where you're Demonicon, which is like I guess it's kind of like a cross between power armor and like an astronaut suit. It might be the best way of describing it. And you have like these I forget what they're called, but they're like these ships that have wheels on them, and they can fly, and they can dimensional shift and all this other stuff. And like your international team goes in, and you find that the inside of the zone is like all these different areas, like their little pocket dimensions. It's kind of interesting because they're all named after like remote parts of the galaxy and remote parts of the universe, and they're all kind of like these different pocket dimensions, and each one is kind of a reflection of part of humanity's kind of the collective unconsciousness of humanity. Like one's lust, one's greed. I'm not sure exactly if they correspond to the 7 sins. But it's an interesting idea. The actual characters are kind of interesting. Zelenin's pretty interesting. Who's who's Best Girl, who's the law character. I think his name is Jimenez, whatever his name is. The Chaos guy is also likable. Kind of the neutral guy, the computer, I really like, Arthur. Unless I'm misremembering his name. And then you have like Jack Squad. You have the Angel Matsuma, I think is how you pronounce his name. And you just have a lot of kind of interesting characters. The issue is, as I said, there is not enough story in this game. So like I said, you have to play through like a 7-hour long, boring, repetitive grind fest to get 5 minutes of dialogue. And then it's like, oh, okay, time for the next dungeon. There's like no variety in the gameplay. There's like nothing other than just this endlessly going through the same hallway over and over and over again. And I think initially there was, not sure if there was initially 3 or 4 endings. I know there was definitely 3. There was a law, neutral, and chaotic ending. But in the remake, there's like, I think 4 extra endings, which is kind of a big fuck you. Because getting an ending is like, it takes an absurd amount of time. Like, I remember when I got to the final path and I chose the law path, and then I was like, played it for another 2 or 3 hours and I was nowhere near the end. And I'm like, so these clowns expect me to, if I want to get all 4 endings, to like save the game at like 50 hours in and then reload like 6 times and play another 20 hours on each of them of this like boring, monotonous, like going through the same dungeon, fighting the same enemy over and over again. Like that's like it's a troll. Like the whole game is a troll because it keeps promising like, oh, we're gonna give you this cool stuff. Oh, here's this neat thing. Oh no, you have to go through another boring level. And it is the single worst case of gameplay and story segregation I think I've ever seen. And I'll say, like, Redux is better because in Redux, and I think this says something about your franchise, if it's so hard and there's so much grinding that you sell DLC as a standard part of your games that allow people to skip the grinding because they just don't want to do it. Because I know, I think I know SMT4 had DLC that let you just power level, which I used because I just got tired of how long it took to grind. It's not even like when I say grinding, I don't even mean like you can't play it without leveling that much. It's just it's a where the fuck do I go game. So a lot of it is just you running around. Like the map isn't very good. It's not very explanatory. It's not even really a puzzle. It's just a where the fuck do I go game. So I'd say that's my main criticism. If this game was like 50% shorter, mainly because they made the like dungeons half as long, this could be like one of the greats. This could be like a 9 out of 10. As it stands, I'd probably give this like a 5 or a 6 out of 10 because there's very few games like SMT. I think this is the only SMT game I've board quit. It's very rare there's like a game I like from a franchise I like that I don't like finish out of boredom. And this is one of them. So I just wanted to kind of talk about it a bit, say like what I liked about the franchise, what I disliked about it, why I think this is kind of the epitome of everything wrong with it, and to a certain extent, everything right with it. So just some thoughts on my